I am delighted to have Carolyn Corbin, my dear friend and actually noted author and presenter, to be with us today to talk about the topic of Indipreneurialism. And you're going to figure out all of what's involved in that as we go along. She's president for the Center for 21st Century. That's what the C21C represents. And she is internationally renowned. She's an author, a speaker, a futurist, a consultant. She's a member of our National Visiting Committee and our Built team. Some of the books she's written, in even 1993, she wrote a book called Conquering Corporate Dependence, which is kind of a precursor to some of what she's going to talk about today. And then in 2000, she wrote the book Great Leaders See the Future First. And then in 2011, Community Leadership 4.0, Impacting the World Gone Wiki. I know she has been a consultant to whole nations and states and companies, and we are delighted to have her with us today. Thank you, Carolyn.
Just so everybody know, this is an unusual webinar for us because so much of this is based on material that Carolyn has published with international copyrights. This is really for your personal use only as a participant in the webinar. So if you do want to make copies of any of this or use this in your classroom, which we would love for you to do, we just need you to write to Carolyn at that email and just get written permission from her first, because it's just a whole different sort of ballgame with all these publishers and the copyright rules. All right, so her email will be at the end as well. So just if you like this, you want to use it in your classroom, I think Carolyn would love for you to do that, but just have to check with her first to make sure you get the proper permission.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be with all of you who have joined us today. It's a very interesting time in global adventures that we all probably need to take a really good look at, and I know it gives us pause as we gather together today to think about what we are facing now and what we will be facing in the future. And there are particular sets of skills which we are going to be discussing that will help us navigate these waters that we are in now and are going through in the future. What we're going to talk about through here are really observations. My profession is futurism, and we look really far ahead. In fact, I have been researching this topic for 40 years. And we've been assessing the trends and what the trends would be in the 21st century. The outline that I presented as a proposal for doing this webinar was presented in January, in fact, accepted by Mark and Ann on January 14th, I believe, before we really knew the impact that this pandemic was going to have on our culture and on our lives. In fact, probably most people had not even heard that it was happening. So with that in mind, the things that we're talking about today are predictable. And with observations and with critical thinking, we all can start looking forward to things that may happen. Now, what is going on today is something we call in futurism a wild card, meaning that it may be out there and we may have the possibility of having something like this happens, but when it happens and the degree to which it happens is always a surprise. And the idea is, how much do we get ready for something like this before it happens, before we really know? Anyway, we talk about some of these as we go through here, and then later on we can take a deeper dive as we do that throughout other sessions, maybe beyond this one. So, as we move along, one of the things I want to mention is on your cover sheet that Mark is showing there on the visuals, we mention that these are observations. These are not my opinions. Sometimes people think, well, you say this is going to happen or maybe not happen or show up somewhere on the radar. They think that it's my opinion. These are not my opinions. These are my observations. And sometimes my observations are very different from my opinions. So these are observations. This is not professional advice over what to do specifically. So if you need professional advice in all kinds of different areas, whether it be finance, legal, and so forth, please contact your professionals in those particular areas, no matter what the situation is in life, in order to be able to get your counsel in those particular areas. And it's written out totally for you in the sheet, the cover sheet there in your visuals. So moving right along, Anne mentioned it just a little bit, the C21C. We talk about C21C Indipreneurial Lifeskills. Now, why did we put our company name, which is Center for the 21st Century, abbreviated C21C, why did we put that in front of Indipreneurial? And the reason is, back when we were developing the program and when we came out with the book Conquering Corporate Codependence in 1993, we went ahead and trademarked the word Indipreneurial. And over a 10-year period, I kept that. And we had so many asks, inquiries about using the word that I decided to drop the trademark on it and let people use it as they wish and open it up to the use out in the general public. Because of that, it's being used as people wish. So now I use the adjective C21C because when we talk about definitions and applications of Indipreneurial life skills, then that's what our definition is in the Center for the 21st Century. For instance, you may Google the word Indipreneur or Indipreneurial. And when you do that, you may find that an entrepreneur in India is called an Indipreneur. Or you might find that an author of various books working by him or herself is called an Indipreneur. Because after we released the trademark, then it was legally fine to use the word in any way they wished. So we'll be talking about C21C Indipreneurial life skills, and we will define that in just a few minutes as we go through here. Next, these will be considered soft skills. Now, most of you teach hard skills. Most of you are from the tech industry. Isn't that correct? And most people that have registered and are participants here they teach high-tech courses?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So those are hard skills, and those are the necessary skills that we need for making application, for our career development, and so forth. But what people are finding, companies such as Korn Ferry are writing on it, the World Economic Forum, who's talking about a fourth revolution, which is digital, is beginning to talk about it. Other LinkedIn surveys are beginning to show that almost equal to hard skills in the workplace and in life will be the need for soft skills. Some of those soft skills are critical thinking, emotional intelligence, collaboration, communication, and we could go on and on. So when we looked back at what we call a life skills ecosystem that we've developed here, all those skills and many, many more are included in what we call the Indipreneurial life skills. So that's what we're going to be doing an introduction to today. In fact, today will be an introduction, and then if more is needed, then we can do a deeper dive into each of the individual skills as time goes on. Now, if we could start reviewing the takeaways, the first visual takeaway number one. In fact, we have three takeaways. Today, when we finish, if these are the things that you incorporate into your learning set, then this will be, we will feel we have done our job today. Now, more exact skills, more exact applications can come at a later time, but today is the introduction to C21C Indipreneurial life skills. So the first takeaway is after a 2-decade millennial transition period, in other words, 2000 to 2010 and 2010 to 2020, after those 2 decades, as of 2020, the world has truly entered the 21st century, which will be a span of time unlike anything the world has ever experienced. Now, we knew there would be a group of things, many things, but we had no idea when we were getting this outline together that what we would be experiencing at the time today, at the time of this webinar, that it would be starting some of the things that the world has never experienced, at least to this volume. I have never seen a shutdown, nor a pandemic, and all the ramifications of what's going on before, like this. So this first takeaway is for us to realize that it's going to be a span of time over the next at least 20 years, unlike anything the world has ever experienced, starting now. Takeaway number 2. The 21st century will offer myriad or many opportunities and overcomable challenges. And yes, overcomable is a word, not something I made up. In other words, there are all kinds of opportunities that are going to be in these years that we're going to be talking about. And it's the ability to identify those opportunities and then to have the skills to overcome all the challenges that we're going to face that will determine what's going to happen on the other side. Now, as we divide this 21st century into various parts, I had it divided up to 2030. That would be the first segment. 2020 to 2030 is going to be an area of a time, a space and time of discombobulation, of disruption. Most every institution of which we are familiar is going to experience rapid change, high-speed change, warp-speed change. And because of that, we will be asked to make very, very fast responses to that. And we need to upskill, we need to do a lot of things, and that will be in the discussion later. So all challenges will be overcomable, and there will be myriad opportunities, and we will look for those opportunities. An Indipreneur does that. They look for the opportunities and how they can overcome. Takeaway number 3. Specific skills for 21st century life success can be mastered by anyone equipped and motivated to do so. So it's people who are equipped with the skills and motivated to implement the skills that will be able to navigate the waters of the 21st century. Now, we talked about moving in a discombobulated time up until 2030 to 2040, somewhere in there, at least to 2030. Then after that, when we look at 20 more years, so up to around 2040, we're going to see many other things happening. From 2040 to 2045, you're going to see the convergence of humans and machines, the beginning of that, experimentation, and eventually convergence, literally, of humans and machines, and that will be a whole new frontier. And what happens between now and 2050, because in 2050 we will be going interplanetary. We will be mining asteroids, or at least looking at doing that. We probably won't have perfected that at this point. We will be looking at colonizing Mars, all kinds of different things. So with that in mind, then how are we going to determine what it is we need to do? So a turning point, I believe, is 2050. What we do and how we live our lives and how we pursue our careers and how we navigate the waters that are ahead of us until 2050 will determine what we do from 2050 to the year 2100. And a lot of people, especially the ones just born today, will be living in the 22nd century. 80 years is not all that far away, 81 years. That will be into the 22nd century. So it's important that we get these skills so that we can look at the future for our young people. Okay, now let's move on to the next visual. you have a handout. So one that you received yesterday was called How C21C Indipreneurial Are You? Now, we asked people not to take this, not to answer the questions, not to fill in this instrument until we ask you to today. And the reason is, before we explain Indipreneur any further, I want people to go ahead and take this so you won't skew your results. It takes about 7 minutes to go through it. And what you do is respond to each of the following statements by filling in the blank preceding the statement. Put a 0 if it never applies to you, a 1 if the statement sometimes applies to you, and put a 2 if the statement always applies to you. Okay, then when you finish, add all your values, place it in the total at the end of the instrument, and then you can look at the descriptions if you wish, or just put it aside and we will talk about the descriptions later. This should take you about 7 minutes, and I'll give you 7 minutes. Okay, we've already been over this pretty much, this definition, but what is an C21C Indipreneur? It's an individual with entrepreneurial skills, making that person capable of maximizing life within or without an organizational structure. In other words, a person can have entrepreneurial skills, but they really don't have to go out and start a big organization. Many people who will be working in this particular gig economy, which will continue to grow in the future, will be one-person shops who will be working probably part-time in a gig and maybe full-time for a corporation. And one of the soft skills that's needed in the corporation also is for a person to be innovative, to critically think about how they can help. In fact, in times like these, I'm seeing a lot of articles asking people to look at how they can create value for themselves so that they will be indispensable. That's becoming a new thought as we go through these particular days in which we are finding ourselves today. We have, necessary and unnecessary, and needed and not needed, and all that sort of thing. And the idea is now, if you're an Indipreneur, you will be in charge of looking at how can you make yourself indispensable to your organization. How can you create such value that no matter what's happening, you will have work? And that's one of the things that I see being talked about a lot on Facebook and different things, and also studies being done in the major human resource organizations already. So how can you have entrepreneurial skills yet you're still an individual? That would be a C21C Indipreneur, an individual with entrepreneurial skills. You may be in an organization, or you may be out there by yourself. How can you do this? And what are these skills? What are these Indipreneur life skills? They are skills that entrepreneurs have, and those will empower an individual to successfully navigate the challenges and opportunities of the 21st century with or without an organizational structure around you. So these are the skills that are necessary for a person to make it with or without an organizational structure. Any organizational structure. And there are ways that we can do this. Okay, now we're going to look at the 4 descriptors. Got ahead of myself a while ago. All right, the first one is exploratory. The next few years there, you see we have from 2020 to 2050, it's going to be very exploratory. That means going into the unknown. Lots of exploration in outer space. We're going to have a new space race starting up. In fact, we already have. There is a space race going on. It reminds me of the first space race that I recall, and that was back in the 1960s when we had the moon race. We're going back into a space race now. Some of your private, especially high-tech entrepreneurs are getting in, and so rather than being just government financed, it'll be public-private partnerships, as well as some will go just totally privately. Okay, number 2, innovative. Innovation will be happening like never before. We will find new uses for what we have used before. Innovation is taking place right now to try to contain or to try to mitigate the current crisis through medications we have used for other things. Well, that's going to happen all over. So we have things sitting here, not just in medication, but in engineering uses and in appliances and in technology. What else can we use it for? That's one of the questions you ask in innovation. Secondly, there are new combos happening. In other words, new combinations of several things that we have here. We can recombine them and create something new. And then thirdly, we will discover many new elements such that we can discover new things that we've never seen before. They aren't here to be repurposed. They aren't here to be combined, but it's something totally new. So it's going to be a very innovative time coming forward. The third, adventurous. Adventurous means exciting, unusual, and experiences that could be risky. An adventurer in the past and in the future never operates without some risk. So a C21C Indipreneur sets themselves up for some risk. They have to have calculated risk, and they have to understand how much they want to risk, and that's up to you as an individual. And then finally, another descriptor of the next few years is opportunity filled. There are going to be lots of possibilities out there, and the idea is to identify those responsibilities. These four big descriptors will lead us to a lot of smaller descriptors. And on the next visual, we'll see those. And we're going to go over those very rapidly because one way or the other, we've already talked about them. Dynamic, meaning ever-changing. Disruptive means things are chaotic and they won't be the way they were. And for people that really enjoy comfort zone complacency, they're going to be really shocked in this particular new decade because it's going to be very disruptive. And as I mentioned before, the disruption will come in every institution that you and I know. It has been coming in business for the last several years. In fact, there are things that we use in futurism to study something that might be in the future because it's already happened in the past. And one of my bellwethers for disruption is business. Business began to be disrupted in the 1970s. And we can talk about that at a later time. So there are patterns that are already set, but some of your more stable institutions like education, other types of government entities, religion, all those will also be disrupted in the future, and it will be up to people to mire through these particular circumstances and keep things in balance. And of course, that is another soft skill. How do you harness chaos? That's another soft skill because it's going to be chaotic. Another descriptor is earning. In other words, we earn because we take responsibility. And there will be more requirement for responsibility taking. We had become, after World War II, quite dependent, for instance, on our workplaces to do a lot of things for us, or to even tell us that we needed new skills because they were doing away with some department and they were going to create a new department, so they were going to reskill us in that area. It's up to us now to look forward. Now, companies will be able to help, and the government will step in with some courses, but we can't wait for that to happen. How do we reskill ourselves? How do we look ahead in an earning economy? Then we take responsibility for saying, what will it be like? Now, there's a skill called resourcing, and that means how do you find out this information, or how do you access other people who know this information? You don't do it all yourself. The difference in an entrepreneur and an individualist, the difference is very great. An individualist says, I'm going to live my life and I'm going to do everything myself. The entrepreneur says, I want to be responsible for myself, but I know how to be interdependent and how to access all the people and information and resources that are necessary so that I can operate interdependently in this big global system. And it's a very different situation. Mosaic, we're getting ready to talk about that. Mosaic means that tiny little diverse parts eventually create a whole picture. something that's definitive, and we'll go over that in a minute. Smart, especially smart in the technology area, and people who operate the technology or who use the technology or who invent the technology will be smart. So smart people, smart tech in the 21st century. We've had that for several generations, but it's accelerating that. Convergent, we talked about the convergence of people and machines, or of people and technology. That's going to be an interesting one because we can always predict the psychological and emotional and human skills we need to navigate waters of uncertainty. But when we converge a machine or technology with a human, will human nature change? And that's one of the thoughts that I continue to work with, and that's some of the things I'm talking about now, is what will it be after 2050 or after 2045, somewhere in there. Interplanetary, meaning we'll go away from this planet. Some will not return because they will live other places, but we will explore the universe, not just our own planet Earth. Revitalizing, that means we'll constantly be renewing, because when you're in chaos, the end stage of chaos is renewal. And then chaos happens so rapidly that as soon as you've renewed, something else happens, and then you start the chaos all over again, and you constantly renew. So if you constantly renew, you're constantly revitalizing. It's all going to happen at warp speed. And I want to say some words about wiki and what that means. When Anne read the title of my last book, Community Leadership 4.0, Impacting a World Gone Wiki, it's amazing how much the wiki experience is impacting our culture. And we'll move on and we'll be talking about that in just a few minutes. Okay, next. Wiki. So it's less than a few minutes we're going to be talking about it. Wiki, a wiki community, and now community is people doing life together. It can be a virtual community. We are a virtual community this morning. And for an hour and a half, we're going to be doing life together over a typical issue that we're talking about, a particular topic. And in that, there will be emergent leaders who will stand up and ask questions and say things, or maybe you're sitting down, whatever you want to do, but they will stand out. You have emergent leaders, but the emergent leaders may not be consistent leaders, because later on, under another wiki environment or a wiki culture, they may follow and someone else will lead. So it's in and out so far as leadership is concerned. It's vital, chaotic, dynamic, and ultimately cohesive at a higher level than normal, because there'll be tremendous differences. And so then we'll be higher level before we can actually form unity. So what is that unity? How do we find unity when we're so different and when the differences are increasing, especially philosophical differences, rather than lessening? So as we look at all this, wiki, it's very important to remember that wiki is a Hawaiian word meaning fast. But really the secret to a wiki is that you can edit it, and that the power is distributed among the users or creators of the wiki. So when people today, part of human nature says what's happening for me in culture will be what I expect or what I feel entitled to in the workplace, in my community. I'll expect my city councils and mayors and governors and leadership in America to have a wiki type environment. So today, the world, in my opinion, not just today, it's been doing this for a while, but I have what I call a 4.0 community dominance model. And that model says that the world has now gone wiki, where we expect these things from people. We expect everything to be open source, that everybody has a say in what happens, that we can alter it bottom up as well as top down, and that power is distributed. So a lot of other characteristics, but this is totally new. That it's been evolving, especially in business, but it's totally new in society and globalization at large. Okay, we'll do more of that later. Let's look at the 7 generations, the mosaic. Remember, we said that they are tiny, diverse parts that make up a beautiful end picture, a mosaic. And it makes perfect sense when you see the picture as a whole. Now, the major contributors to this mosaic that society is moving to are the values of the various generations, and we now have 7 generations, the most in history, that are all living at the same time, that have separate values. So we have a big diversity of values, and there are particular trends. Now, we are impacted to a great extent by what happens during the time from when we're age 10 to about age 17, and then greatly impacted by the economy and the type of jobs that are available and so forth, or the type of education we get or what we study. But we're greatly impacted then if there are jobs, or what is the economy like when we first hit the workforce. And so it's as you move forward through those generations that have completely different values, and I have a lot of notes to go over, but we're running a little bit short of time here. So just suffice it to say that we become much more diverse philosophically and in many other ways as we move forward through the generations. Now, we had names for the first few generations: greatest generation, pre-baby boomers, baby boomers, and then we started using the alphabet, generation XYZ, and I have named this myself because I have not really read any agreed upon name for the new generation, which is being born right as we speak, 2018 and after. It'll probably be, most generations go 15 to 20 years, and you can see those are my calculations there. Some are accepted. The baby boomer generation is fairly accepted. It's 46 to 64. Others vary. But I'm calling it Generation 4.0 because they are the first generation that will come into this digital fourth revolution that the world is entering. And so the impact will be very different, and we will have a lot of disagreements. Mosaics have a lot of disagreements over how to proceed under rules, regulation, constitution, rules of the institution, and so forth. So we have to find some level at which we agree. A mosaic then will agree to disagree. And then after we agree to disagree, we move up to find what's important to us for unity. That is a work in progress at this point. As you know, we are not there yet. So next, there are processes for producing all these things. And these are the 5 Indipreneur life skills, C21C Indipreneurial Lifeskills, that we're going to be studying. We're going to simply name them today, and we're going to go into one of them, which is optimizing. But the life skills are resourcing, futuring, optimizing, tracking, and balancing. Resourcing produces knowledge because you know how to resource information in people, so that's how you get knowledge. Futuring creates vision, and vision is an important part of being able to navigate the waters of the future. Optimizing creates hope because it makes the best of every situation and finds opportunities, finds the silver lining in every cloud. Tracking creates control because it gives you measurement and feedback, and you work with goals. And so you have a tracking instrument that you use. And then finally, balancing creates harmony. Social balancing as well as individual life balancing, so that we can constantly have harmony. In the next visual, we see that in the 21st century, wisdom, first of all, will be required. Now, you see these 5 life skills that we've just talked about. We can take them and make an equation out of them. Knowledge plus vision equals wisdom. So you can take 2 of those particular life skills, learn both of those, and you can acquire wisdom. The second thing that's required will be resilience. And resilience is made up of hope, plus control. So that's another 2 life skills that you can learn and combine, and so then you'll have resilience. And the ability to make a comeback is going to be very important. The ability to get through things and land on your feet is going to be very important. And then number 3, well-being. We're talking about mind, body, spirit, financial and social well-being. Not only well-being within you, within yourself, but well-being for society as a whole. That creates harmony. When we find society, or we find in our own lives, we're out of harmony, maybe in just one of those 5 things I've mentioned, then we will have disharmony. And when we have that, then our well-being is affected. So wisdom, resilience, and well-being with those 5 life skills. And that's what we're going to be studying this time, and then deeper diving if you so desire in the future. Okay, next. C21C Indipreneurial Lifeskills ecosystem. These 5 skills all interact. Which do we do first? Which do we do second? Well, it's not linear. It's like a complex system. In fact, an ecosystem is a complex system. So they all operate together. It's just like the human body. It's a very complex system. And when the lungs are not doing well, then it affects the other organs in the body. When another organ in the body is not doing well, then the heart can't do its job as well. So we look at all these things, then they become equal. And so you can see how we've drawn the visual there. Everything is interacting. So you have your system, which is the Indipreneur life skills ecosystem. And then you have the subsystems, which are each of the processes: the futuring, optimizing, resourcing, tracking, and balancing. So we will be going through, we'll start out with the optimizing life skill, but first let's take the handout, the Indipreneur life skills handout, the tool analysis, and look at it and talk about it. I want to go through some just specific things that are in there. I don't know how you answered these, and let me say these are situational. You may answer these differently today than you would have answered them 4 months ago. You might answer them differently today than you will a year from now. So it's in real time that you look at this assessment. Again, these are indicators. They're not diagnoses. So if you'll look at the questions and the statements that you were asked to analyze, first of all, are you comfortable living in the world as it currently exists? That may be a different answer one day that you would answer another day. Or can you step back and have the mental, physical, and psychological control to be joyful and happy and at least at peace when something is totally discombobulated in the world around you? Is that possible? And that's something that you need to ask yourself. Now, we won't go through all of them because you've been through them. But if you'll look at number 6, I have very little anxiety in my life, although change and chaos abound in my environment. Now, remember, these are entrepreneurial skills, and these particular skills I have worked with for many, many years. In fact, almost 4 decades as we were developing this, because this is the way the world is and will be. So these questions or statements are as relevant today as they were as we've developed them. Number 7, I consider myself a team player, and when serving on a team, I am more concerned with attaining the common good than my own personal agenda. And that's something we need to be really honest with ourselves about. How do we react to situations that may call for common good above being right ourselves and so forth? Number 9, I feel secure because my career lies within me and not with any specific organization. That's an interesting one, because it's very important in this new environment to understand a career lies within a person. They must understand their hard skills, and I call them skill sets. The same person with a particular skill set may have 10 or 15 or 20 different career moves in the coming century or in the coming next 80 years. So you have skills, but how do you transfer those skills when one use of those skills goes away and you have to use those skills in another way? And so that's something that people need to learn. And then we move on down. Let's see, let's move kind of far. I want to go to number 22. I have enough money saved or invested. In other words, you have enough reserves or have other sources of income so that I would not feel threatened financially if it took 6 to 12 months to locate other work, start my own business, or work independently. And statistics tell us that not a whole lot of people do that. Yet, a good entrepreneur will have reserves of at least 6 months to a year. And particularly in this environment, I have talked with people who can say no to that question, and others can say yes to that question. And their peace of mind is so very different when they can say yes to that question as opposed to saying no. This is one of the first times as a nation and as a globe that particular statement has been tested. But it has been in the past many, many times. And so after the Great Depression of the 1930s, that became a rule, is that if you're going to take a chance, if you're going to take a calculated risk, if you're going out on an adventure, make sure you can take care of yourself 6 to 12 months, depending on jobs, depending on anything else, because things can change and you'll turn on a dime. Okay, now let's look at the first life skill, optimizing. In the next visual. Optimizing is the process of creating hope through believing and acting upon the idea that there is always something better on the other side. In other words, there's something better on the other side of every crisis. There's something better on the other side of every loss. I've seen prisoners of war who were in solitary confinement over a 7-month period in Vietnam. I've seen them interviewed. And one of the things they said is that they never lost hope. They always believed that they would be free. They always believed that there was something better on the other side. And when those dark days and those dark hours in that cell made them try to think negatively, they refused to do so. And they started doing other types of things to keep their mind distracted because they spent, by definition, a lot of time alone. So an optimist, a person who specializes in optimizing, will always believe there is something better on the other side. Now, next visual, the optimizing life skill. That life skill goes for people who master the optimizing process. And these people have two things. They have a high degree of self-esteem and a healthy regard for personal responsibility. Now, as we go through here, you're going to see that some people have a high degree of entitlement, and they don't understand entitlement. And we will talk about that in a minute. So how much is too much entitlement? How much can we expect? And how much is our right? And how much do we need to step back and become earning or self-responsible for getting some things done in our life? The real optimizer knows the difference. Okay. I hope everybody has finished the personal response style exercise and looked at your score and looked at your profile. Mark sent it out, did a very good job. He took my paper version and totally transformed it and made it interactive for you on Excel. You have profile, You have quiz first, and then you have your profile. So it should have calculated your profile, and you can tell where you are, if at least on that. Again, this is an indicator. Excuse me, let me get some water. The profile will at least give you a graphic of how you rank. Now, if you have a 10-point difference, which was said in the instrument, if you have a 10-point difference in different response styles, then you'll have a significant domination of a particular style. But if you have only a 3 to 5 point difference, that means that you really have very little difference in profile dominance. Now, I have never seen, I created this instrument because I couldn't find, and I had never seen an instrument that measured self-esteem in a 2x2 matrix crossing a degree of entitlement, so that people, not discussing it with anyone else if they don't wish to, but they could just look at themselves and see how they are situationally determined. Now, we have 4 different types. Obviously, a 2x2 matrix, you would have 4 different types of responses that you could have, and a lot of these responses are situational. Sometimes situations will find you when you need to exercise one of these 4 and not necessarily always be an optimizer. And so good judgment would tell you when and what to do, when and where. Okay, so we have the 4 styles, which would be the next visual. And we have them such that they would make the 2x2 matrix. There's 2 continua there. And each one of those lines measures low to high. So you have low to high self-esteem, and you have low to high entitlement. Now, we divide that, and we have descriptors to these response styles. And we call the first one, and we'll start out with controller. That person has high self-esteem and high entitlement. We'll talk about that later. A manipulator, a manipulator has high entitlement and low self-esteem. A rescuer, now we're not talking about someone who courageously goes into a fire and sacrifices their own life or endangers their own life to pull somebody out of a fire and save their lives. It's not that type of rescuer, but there's another type of rescuer that consistently, as a habit, goes out to rescue people for interesting reasons. And they are called enablers. And how much of an enabler is a person can be measured. Now, the most scores you can make in this would be 40. The closer to 0 you are, the farther away from your being a purist of any of these. But the closer to 40 you are, the closer you would be to being a purist in any of these. And then finally, the optimizer has low entitlement and high self-esteem. Now, we don't have any time to go very deeply, as I've said many times through here, into any of these right now. But what we want to do, and this then will go for the next 30 minutes, or really about the next 25 according to my clock, to end at 11:30, we will go through these types of response styles, and we will set that up. And then later on, if it's desired, then we can dig very deeply into the response style. And we can find out exactly what causes us to be in one style versus another, and so forth. Okay. Next visual, we'll look at response style factors. Each of these styles has certain expectations of others and/or themselves. Each style has a general, overriding, recurring emotional condition. Now, all these are from my observations. And these are the 4 I've come up with. Each style has a propensity for operating in an established way. In other words, they have an MO, modus operandi. And then each style has an internal gratification that comes from doing that style. Okay, now we'll start making this make sense because I know it's being poured out here fairly rapidly. Let's go to the next visual. And we'll go to the 4, and you'll see the first one we're going to discuss is the response style of controller, the one with high self-esteem and high entitlement. Now, let's take a look at the controller on the next visual. Expectations. What does the controller expect? They expect others to follow their rules. The controller feels so entitled to loyalty and to the fact, because they have such high self-esteem, they're a great leader, they feel. And so they have high self-esteem means how you feel about yourself. So high self-esteem says they feel really good about their ability to lead, and they expect everybody else to follow their rules because they feel their rules are so good. Secondly, they operate in an emotional state of anger. Think to yourself as you're sitting there listening to this, why would a controller operate in anger? It's because they're always in a battle. And they're always looking to win that battle because they're always wanting to hit back. Because they're looking to win. If you play a sports game with a controller, rather than think of it as a sport and we'll all sit here, talk and enjoy it, the controller closer to 40, let's say if it's a 40 controller, now what I will describe as a 40 controller, all of us, each of us has a bit of controller in us, but the controller would try to beat you badly. They would want to win. So they walk around mostly in a state of anger. And they always have a battle going. Then, what is their mode of operation? Usually they attack. They're attacking. They're paying back. They feel they were entitled to something that someone has stepped on that's in their path, and they're attacking. Right? What is the internal reward that they get when they act this way? The reward is conquering, overcoming a perceived enemy, and it may be perceived because there may not be a real enemy. So that's a number 40 controller. Now, let's take a look next, visual. The second is manipulator. Now, the manipulator has a high degree of entitlement, but a low degree of self-esteem. So in the self-esteem, they don't think much of themselves, but they believe they should have what they decide they want. So the manipulator expects too much from others. Not too much from themselves, but too much from others. They expect too little from themselves, actually. Their emotional state, then, is depression and hurt, most of the time because people disappoint them. They really want people to do for them and do for them and do for them, but sometimes people disappoint them. In fact, often people disappoint them. And that can lead them to not feel very well about themselves, and that causes them, in many cases, them to feel depressed. Their MO is to ambush. Their mode of operation is to ambush. That means come at you from behind. You use the sentence a lot, I think I'm being manipulated. Now, all of us do that to some extent, some ways. Maybe we want to meet somebody important. We go to somebody else and tell them how wonderful they are, and we really enjoy their friendship, and we think they're the smartest people in the world. And by the way, could they introduce us to so-and-so? So we're building that person up on purpose to try to get to another person, so we're ambushing that person. We're asking something of them. We're manipulating them. Now that probably, if we do that once in a while, we'd have almost a 0 score. But there are people who have nearly a 40 score in manipulation. The reward, the internal reward to a manipulator is subversive conquest. In other words, they feel they win if they get somebody to act for them or to fulfill whatever it is they want. And they really don't have much conscience about the fact that somebody had to go to a lot of trouble to get what they thought they want, or what they thought they wanted in past tense. Okay, next. Rescuer, and again, we defined rescuer before, is not the courageous person who goes in and rescues, but it's the person who habitually rescues. And the person who habitually rescues enables people. And I think you'll probably notice that the rescuer and the manipulator are an interesting pair. The manipulator loves a rescuer, and the rescuer gets such good feelings, such good vibes from eternally rescuing that they can really go through life as a pair. I don't know if you know anyone like that, or if you know two people like that, or if you can identify that. We're going to ask in a minute, at least for you to write down things, but those two people make an interesting pair. So the rescuer expects too much of themselves. In fact, they probably have anxiety attacks. They probably have various physical problems and issues that come from high levels of anxiety, because they're always trying to help, 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 help. Now, there's certainly greatness in doing good, but when you're doing good for the wrong reasons, or when helping someone else is hurting you, or when helping someone else is hurting them, then we need to step back and question ourselves. So the MO then, well, they run around with guilt and frustration all the time because they just don't feel they're doing enough. And then the MO is to react and enable. So their mode of operation is basically they're looking for somebody to fix almost on a constant basis. Just like the controller is looking for somebody to have a battle with, the rescuer is looking for someone to fix or some problem to fix. And the internal reward that they get from it is saying, you're such a great person, thank you. Or they get lots of attention for being this person who constantly is fixing people and fixing things. And this person also is afraid to say no for one reason or another. They constantly feel that they need to fix someone else's life. Okay, next visual. Optimizer. I don't know how you scored an optimizer, but that person is one who really can master well the optimizing skills, which we will then develop down the road. What do they expect in life? They expect a double win. You win, I win. If we're in an argument, they don't necessarily have to be right. Let's just make sure we get a double win out of it. They also have strong boundaries, because when a person is an optimizer, there's a fine line between they're being used by other people and they're really being an optimizer so they can get good results because they know they will come out better on the other side. So we have to look at that. Now, there are two questions. When one sees an optimizing situation, let's say, and we'll talk about this again much later, but what if you're in a negotiation? What if you're in a conflict? There are a couple of questions you need to ask yourself about the other party or parties that you're going to be in a conflict or negotiation with. And one of those questions is, are those people rational? Can they reason? And the second question you need to ask yourself is, do the people have good intentions or bad intentions? And you have to ask yourself, as a subtopic to this, if they have bad intentions, will anything I do cause them to want to come out with a double win? Or are they maybe that controller that's out to get me, and nothing I do will cause us to have a double win? You need to set good boundaries. We have strong boundaries there, because sometimes you're going to have to walk away. In other words, if you are negotiating with somebody and you know they have not your best interest, in other words, we call it evil intent. Evil simply means the intent to do you harm. So if they have that intent, then if you go into a negotiation knowing that, you're certainly going to have done your homework before you go in there. Or you may decide it's not going to work. That is not a negotiation, so you walk away. And then you can meet people who are totally irrational. And so you look and you say, we're in conflict with these people, but they're not reasonable. And if they're not reasonable, you can't reason with them. So a good optimizer does not try to always get a double win, but they do it only when they feel that the other party is rational and has good intent. That way you can come out with mutual outcomes eventually. Now, the emotional state of an optimizer, love, peace, happiness, and they are not ruled by fear. They walk around that way and they believe in the best of others, but again, they have boundaries and they discern the fact that some people do not have their best interest in mind, and some people don't want a double win, and some people are out to get them, perhaps. And they have to know the difference. They are very proactive people. They walk around proacting. Now, some people get the rescuer confused with the optimizer. Yes, the optimizer will fix something if necessary, if they believe it's reasonable to do so. And yes, they will be proactive in looking ahead and being responsible for themselves and looking at the good things, the opportunities that can come, and already think about working on the other side. But they use good judgment in their strong boundaries that they're setting. And finally, what is the reward they get? Equality of outcome, mutuality, and sharing. And there are techniques for building mutuality in conversations with people, in trying to sell an idea, in all sorts of ways. One can build mutuality. There's techniques for that. And again, we'll go over those later on when we dig deeper into this. Now, let's move to the next one. We have a few minutes left. Let's move to the next visual to talk about discussion. If you want to answer this question, then one or two of you, if you wish, could answer the question. We'll wait 1 second to see if anybody does, or you can just think about it. This is up to you. Does increased assumption of personal responsibility reduce the degree of entitlement in one's life? Now, entitlement simply means you feel you have a right to something. Now, if you have a contract with somebody, you have a right to that contract. If somebody has verbally promised you something, you have a right to that. We have rights politically, rights nationally. I mean, we have valid rights, but can we tell valid rights from just perceived rights on our part because we made them up? Now, does increased assumption of personal responsibility reduce the degree of entitlement in one's life? In other words, as a person assumes more responsibility for life choices and consequences, does that person's expectations of life entitlements diminish? You think they do or not? I'll wait about 1 second. You can think about it or you can answer.
Carolyn,
Sounds
we're
as if people
almost
are-
all
Yes.
we're almost all on mute because we're working from home and there are lots of other, I guess, sounds. So I'm going to
Okay.
ask people to answer in the chat box, and then we can read that back to you. I'm going to give
Okay.
my response first, and that is increased personal responsibility definitely has reduced the degree of entitlement that I have. And over my lifetime, I think I have increased my level of personal responsibility. And yeah, that's just me.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Ann. Anyone else? Okay, while you're checking
Mark,
the
do you
chat
want to
box.
read? Mark, do you want to read the chat box, or Christina?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time unmuting myself. Yes, so we got a couple of responses here. One person says yes, and assume a balance of realistic assumptions for what is an entitlement. Someone else says, interesting follow-up would be to hear how to work with people with different lifestyle response types. Someone else, yeah, there's a couple of people who agree with the statement that increased assumption of responsibility does reduce entitlement.
Okay, okay, very good. Well, some of those questions would take a long time to answer, and probably you will keep those, won't you? And if we do this and go into more depth later on, then we can address part of what we present in those based on the questions in the chat box. Would that work for you?
Sure, I have one more. I think they would.
Oh,
I think
okay.
they would as they come to the realization of responsibilities. Another comment we just got.
Okay, very good, very good. All right, thank y'all so much for doing that, and those will be fodder, if you will, for looking at what you will want to talk about at a later time. Okay, now let's move to the next visual. You see the 4 optimizing life skill styles. Again, controller, manipulator, rescuer, optimizer, and certainly you have them in your handouts also. Now, let's move to the next visual, and this, you can think about it as we go through here, or you can write some of it down because these are interactive exercises with yourself. For instance, response style. What are the pros and cons of being a controller response style? You see, sometimes we have to go, we may have to win something sometimes. We're in a war right now. We're trying to win the battle with the virus. And so we're in war mode. We're doing whatever we have to, and we are looking to the experts to tell us what to do, and most of us are doing it. So now we have moved from optimizer mode as a nation, and we've moved in controller mode right now. So you see the situation calls for sometimes that we move to controller mode. Okay, now, think of a person, if you will, in your mind. That's what I did. Kind of picture somebody that you think runs around in controlling mode all the time, not necessarily just in crisis, but all the time. Think of that person. Now, what would be the pro of their ability to get work done? What would be the pro of having them on your team?
I would suspect they would get some work done. They might not like the means.
Well, that's true. So you have to check on them. So, then you have to stop to say, okay, if I'm an optimizer, then I have to say, do I draw my boundaries? Do I have to look ahead for expectations, or is it worth it? And then that's where you have, as a leader, or, if these people are personal friends, then you have to decide how much energy you want to put into that, or if you know that they simply believe they know what they're doing, and generally they do. If you believe generally they do, then you might want to put them in there because, yes, they do get the job done. And then what is a negative?
They might destroy relationships, in my opinion.
Yes, they may not be what I call resonant, and it's not just me calling the word resonant, but a lot of leadership experts talk about good leaders are resonant. In other words, they resonate with the people. Obviously, when a controller is at work, if they need to get the job done, then they're willing to not resonate. And so then you have to decide, do I want resonant above people that can get the job done, or do I want the job done and then they might not be likable? I don't know, but that could be a con. All right, next, manipulator. What is the pro of a manipulator?
This is Laura. Can you hear me? Laura Berry.
Yes, I can barely hear you, but I can. Yes.
Sorry. Yes. Honestly, I can't come up with a good pro for a manipulator other than possibly, same with controller, getting the job done.
Okay. Other than what? I lost you on. You can't come up with a pro other than
Getting the job done, possibly in an extreme circumstance.
Okay.
Or I suppose manipulating another manipulator, that might be a good pro.
Right, maybe they would cancel each other out.
So,
Well, no, that's great, Laura, because, I looked down, I went through this myself, and I have left that pro blank, just like you did. But you brought up some thoughts that I hadn't really thought of. Yes, a manipulator, manipulating a manipulator might get the job done.
there you go.
Excellent thought. And then, but sometimes these people are really smart. And if you can create an environment, I mean, they'll do a really, really good job.
Yeah.
But then they get in trouble down the road, and then they need to manipulate their way out of it again. So you have to really look at their strong points. And then you have to be careful and watch for the manipulation behavior that if they're a 40 in this, or close to a 40. So it's tricky. And if you're working with someone like this, or if they are in your environment in any way, maybe a friend, maybe a student, maybe whatever, then we have to understand that that's a response style, and that we have to know how to be equipped to do that. Great, Laura. Thank you. That's wonderful. Appreciate the feedback. Okay, rescuer. What's the pro on that? Well, with the rescuer, a lot of people get helped. I think that's probably one of the best pros. And the con on that is they sometimes help people when it actually hurts the people. If they continue to help when it would have been better for the person to have gone out and taken responsibility for oneself, then sometimes they can hurt people by helping people. And if they're a 40 in that, if they're so driven by helping and fixing, they sometimes don't have the discernment ability to know when they're helping someone versus hurting someone. They have to learn to evaluate that. And then finally, the optimizer. A pro is they're very collaborative. They're good at building mutuality. People like them, but they can't be driven simply by wanting people to like them, because if they do, then they become a rescuer. So the optimizer has to have good skills in judging people's motives, because if they can't, they also could become a good friend of the manipulator, and the manipulator could manipulate them, literally. So if one is an optimizer, optimizers are very strong, and it takes years of practice to become that. Okay, I know we're going fast. I apologize. You can go back over these things for yourself, but let me just say in summary for the optimizer, in my opinion, the optimizer gets up when it would be easier to stay down, keeps on when it would be easier to quit, and looks ahead with hope when others have long turned back in despair. And if you can do that, then you're an optimizer. Okay, now let's look at the next one. Next visual, please. We just have 2 or 3 minutes. And you can do this on your own. You can think through it as we go through it now. You can go back and write on it, contemplate on it later. But if your response style was major controller, then why would you put that controller response style in action? Or are you that way all the time? Or when would you put a controller response style in action? If you have some points in that, that means you can shift to it. And in a crisis or whatever, you can put it. So when would you put it in action? Okay, mostly a controller is very valuable in crisis and when a quick turnaround is needed. And then there can be other things you'll say. A manipulator You might become a manipulator when you want something and you honestly can't get it for yourself. You're going to have to go ask for help. But think about, how could you be an optimizer and yet you're still having to ask somebody to help you get something? The main thing is to be truthful, to tell people why you're there, and to build mutuality first, and then tell them why you're there. In other words, be honest. And next, if you're a manipulator, you get mad if they don't help you. An optimizer asks for help, is not afraid to ask for help and truthfully ask for help, but they also realize that that person has the right to turn them down because they do not feel entitled to someone helping them, unless that person has promised to help them and didn't. Now, that's a different if you're going on a promise. A rescuer, they're great people. They have a heart for everybody. They have a heart for needs. And we all turn rescuer when somebody pulls on our heartstrings. And that's not a bad thing. But we have to know when to hold and when to fold in that particular category. And finally, the optimizer. The optimizer, you would become that if you want mutuality, if you want balance as much as you can in the world, and you want to be able to conquer and feel strong. In other words, that would be a good operating mode most of the time. And that's what the goal would be, to become optimizer. And then those optimizing skills we'll be talking about will help build that particular response style in a person. And then what you would think about, and we will need to go on this. When you finish here, if you would, if you have time, think about, how would I move? If I'm a lot controller, how would I move from each response style? How can I be an optimizer? How can I move from optimizer if I'm mostly controller? How can I move from to optimizer if I am mostly a manipulator? How do I move to optimizer if I'm mostly a rescuer? And that will help you today resolve some of those issues, but you have to think it through. But this is simply for you, but then you can recognize others and be able to help others in this. I want to thank you so much for spending this hour and a half with us. I know we've gone through here at probably warp speed of 1,000 words per minute, but it's so refreshing to be with people who are thinking people and wonderful people and are doing what you're doing, because educators will be on the front lines of our nation over the next 20 or 30 years, because education will determine how we end up. The degree that people have, the quality that people have in the future will be determined by the education, by the ability to identify skills, by the ability to help people reskill, and by the courage that all of you have to help make our nation and to make our world and our interplanetary world a better place for all of us to be over the next several years. On the last visual, we have a quote from Steve Jobs. He said, "The people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do." And thank you for being who you are, because you are some of the people that really will be, from today forward, changing the world as you have been in the past. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carolyn. And everybody, please look in the chat box. There is a Survey Monkey. We need to know from you how much you would like to go further into these topics. We had originally planned to have Carolyn this summer in our working connections for a day for a leadership track. At this point, if you don't know yet, I don't believe, Mark, that you've posted it quite yet, but the reality is we're going to have to move that totally online. And we think that this sort of a workshop, probably, though it was really good today, would be even better if it were in person. So we're going to move that to 2021. Mark, do you have something else?
No, that's it. Thank you, everyone, for your time. Thank you, Carolyn, for your time and expertise. We really appreciate your insight in all this. It was great.